Ah, how the time passes. Are we already on part 8? Jason goes on vacation to luxurious, home of the elite, rat capital of the world. For me, this must have been the version I saw the most often on television. I remember everything about it from
chimpanzee to chimpanzee.
So I have a feeling that we're going to have at least one or more characters join George from part 5 in our wrongfully taken by Jason list. So there's a lot of killing going on in this one, so hold on to your butts while we figure out the rules to surviving Friday the 13th, part 8. Jason Takes Vancouver. Hey, okay, let's have a gander at the amount of times each of our rules has been broken in the installment so far, and who would have guessed Jason really hates sexy time? But most of the movie is set on a boat. No one has sex on a boat, which brings us to our first victims, Jim and Susie, who are guilty of having sex on a boat. These two inadvertently bring Jason back to life, and their thank you is death. I'm gonna hit Susie with a not using your brain charge as well. She manages a little separation from Jason, but instead of diving off the boat and heading for land, here's what she decides to do. Okay, thank you, Jason, for putting it into that. Shame on you, Susie. You deserve what you got, much like our next victim, JJ. She was playing some of that old rock and roll music, and we all know sex and rock and roll go together
like lamb and tuna fish.
JJ is jamming and making some mild groinal movements and really rocking. Now, Jason was born June 13th, 1946, and was 11 years old when he drowned. At the time of his death, this was the response to a local high school band performing a perfectly innocent ditty about holding hands at the talent show. That is historic direct evidence that Jason, upon hearing this music, of course would think she was some sex-crazed Satan worshiper who had to die. If she had taken up knitting instead of that guitar, JJ would still be alive today. She wouldn't have found herself in the bows of a ship gyrating her fun zone. She would have been at crocheting mittens safe in her bedroom with her 8 cats. Case closed. Next, we have random boxing guy who I don't even know if he had a fucking name. I don't care. This guy was a dumbass. We're going over the rules on Friday the 13th, but also one of the rules for life is this. You don't fuck with Julius. By the way, t-shirts now for sale at youdon'tfuckwithjulius.com. But he should have known better than to lace up his boots against this god amongst men. There is no one walking God's green earth that can defeat Julius in a boxing match. Shut up, baby video producer. Plus, he just lays there with the towel on his head, not looking, and even says this bit of dialogue.
What do you say we track down those babes later?
So he's probably going to end up breaking rule number 1 as well. Alright, who cares? Farewell, jackass. Ah, Tamara. Despite being the first person to break the rule against having a drink, she's better known as Jason Takes Manhattan's bitch character. Not only is she guilty of doing a little nose candy, she also straight up attempts to seduce her teacher into giving her a passing grade. I know she was a bitch, but she got her comeuppance as Jason was pretty brutal right here. Cruise ship worker Jim is the next to meet the business end of a harpoon, but what was his sin that deserved this punishment from Jason? We don't know much about him, but what we do, we know he was a respectful new father. I suppose it's possible he was sneaking a little hooch on the side to help pass the long nights on the boat, but he did nothing on-screen wrong that should have resulted in this killing. Jim, take your spot next to George as the official second member of the wrongfully taken club. Admiral Robertson is not quite so virtuous, however, as he is guilty of breaking rule number 7, if you're in authority, don't be a dick. Seemingly, the Admiral has been riding Sean his entire life over following in his boating footsteps to the point of chastising him after not nailing some random maritime procedure. Before his untimely demise, though, Admiral Robertson seemed to learn that you can catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. We had a little talk with new father Jim about parenting, but now that Jason has slit his throat, he's going to have no trouble attracting flies. Get it? Because he's dead and dead bodies attract flies, and yes, okay, moving on. Next we have hopeful science scholar Eva, who sadly, after sampling some of that top-notch toot, decides to spend the rest of her voyage engaging on a drug binge for the history books. Much like other famous examples of movie characters who in the depths of an irresponsible and depraved ether binge, she begins to experience the effects of hallucination.
We can't stop here. This is bad country.
Had Eva not been tripping balls, she would not have seen Jason every place she looked and might have been able to escape that damn disco dance hall alive instead of strangled and tossed aside like a rag doll. Don't believe me? Well, maybe you'll believe the popular kids at your high school, along with some random corporate nerd.
Don't do drugs.
There's no hope with dope.
Then we come to Wayne, who has to have the most offenses broken in Part 8 with 4. We'll discuss the last of his broken rules shortly, but right off the bat, he is guilty of lusting after Tamara, knocking back a sweet glass of champagne, and not using his brain when he decides to go on the hunt for Jason, carrying a shotgun with one hand and that bulky-ass camera in the other. Maybe it's just me, but if I found myself trying to track down one of the most infamous killers of all time, I would not hamper myself by carrying around the heaviest, most cumbersome, and unnecessary piece of equipment possible. Maybe if he hadn't been carrying that camera around, he wouldn't have lost his glasses, accidentally killed this random schmo, and oof, that's gotta hurt. Never mind, with all these broken rules, you deserve what you got, Wayne. I've been waiting for Miles to show up. Have you ever watched a movie where a fairly insignificant character just became entrenched in your memory? Well, for me, when I think of a random teen getting brutally murdered, this is the face that pops in my mind. He barely has any lines, but maybe it's the fact that he's always doing something extra, like peeking at Sean's gift, rubbing his hands, and this facial realization.
His lost soul, he's a dented can. He's behind me, isn't he?
He seems to have pretty healthy survival instincts, detecting Jason's presence, running away instead of fighting once his weapon is gone, and oh god no, why are you climbing up that ladder, Miles? Cancel that comment on his survival instincts after he takes a high dive onto an antenna. But what was his actual sin? Well, after Sean called everyone to the bridge, Julius gives this rousing speech.
Now, I say we regroup and let's go find this motherfucker before he finds us, huh? Are you with me?
Watch your mouth, young man, and you'll do no such thing. I'm in charge here.
School is out, McCullough. Okay?
What a speech. I would follow you into any battle, Julius. Shortly after, our fearless leader, Wayne, Miles, and some other randos group together over a pile of weapons. Wait a second. A like-minded group of people that are armed and banded together in a cause? That sounds like a posse to me. And what's another word for posse? Gang. That's right. Rule number 10. Turn in your colors. These punk kids are engaging in gang-related activities, cursing them all to a cold death at the bottom of the sea or river or tributary or whatever the hell type of water this is. Now, this is a good point to stop for a brief discussion. As we just saw with those two randos who joined up with Julius, there are loads of other people on this boat. Here are some waving, here are some engaging in sports, and here are some putting on their boogie shoes at the dance floor. So just how many people are on this damn boat? There doesn't seem to be an official answer, really. So after a brief discussion with ChatGPT, it came up with the number 30 as an approximate amount of uncounted deaths in this film. I suppose I could spend a few nights going through the movie frame by frame and count each individual extra I see and then tally them all together, but thinking about that just makes me feel like this.
Oh, loneliness and cheeseburgers are a dangerous mix.
So while yes, a load more people died on this expedition, breaking any number of rules, for the sake of my sanity, we're just gonna go with the confirmed kill list. Speaking of that, that brings us to our next victim, and hey, does he remind you of anyone?
This voyage is doomed.
It's got a death curse.
That's right, Crazy Ralph. With the disheveled looks and the prophesizing of doom, this has to be Ralph's offspring. Honestly, wouldn't be surprised if Ralph had an orphan at every port along the eastern seaboard. But what did Ralph Jr. do that he deserved an axe in the back for? Well, did you notice how he was standing right next to this giant pipe overhearing JJ's screams of death? That is eerily similar to his father's passing when he was sneaking a peek on Jenny and Paul in part 2. So the nut does not fall far from the tree here, as I will not be convinced Ralph Jr. is not using his knowledge of the ship to peek through grates and listen through pipes just so he can get his rocks off and be a big a prevert as his father before him. Shame, Ralph Jr., shame. We aren't going to waste too much time with these two lowlifes, as their offenses are quite clear, and it also marks one of the rare times in the franchise Jason crosses over from villain to hero when he kills these two jerk faces with extreme prejudice. Thank you, Good Samaritan Jason.
You can do it! Cut his fucking head off!
Here we go. Now it's time, what everyone has been waiting for, the boxing match of the century.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Where our chosen champion Julius deals out all the pain and punishment onto Jason that the mass killer has been causing his victims for years. Oh wait, this isn't good. Why is Julius getting winded? He has his cardio down. Put up your hands, Julius. Oh god, this isn't going to end well. I think we all learned a valuable lesson here, boys and girls. Despite however much of an alpha male you might be, don't get into a damn fist fight with Jason Voorhees. Simple enough? Next, we have the most Canadian law enforcement officer to ever transfer to the NYPD. Okay, he has no name, so I'm just going to call him Mountie Cop. Mountie Cop from the bat shows he is not the brightest bulb in the pack when, after being told about the two punks who kidnapped Rennie, instead decides to draw his weapon on this middle-aged woman. He showed more brain power when, after finding Julius's severed head in his car, decides to call for help instead of, driving the fuck away. Very short period of time on screen, but his stupidity will last a lifetime. Teacher Colleen is the next to meet her maker, but it's not an official Jason kill as she dies in an accidental car explosion, so it's not going to count against the rules. I will say though, I'm very tempted to strike grumpy old Charles and Sean with a charge of not using their brain, letting Rennie drive after being injected with some mystery drug, but I'm feeling like I'm like a nice guy today, so I'm going to let that one slide. The last main character death of Friday the 13th Part 8 goes to Charles. Now I would hit him with a keep it in your pants charge from that makeout session with Tamara, but frankly I think he is
as anatomically impaired as a kendo.
So that just leaves Charles as being this installment's main dick authority figure. Everything he does on screen, from attempting to murder Ralph Jr. to nearly drowning poor Rennie as a child, just proves that he deserves the over-the-top death he receives from Jason. Enjoy! Lastly, we have sanitation worker dude who was just doing his thing, minding his sewer business, trying to feed his sewer family when Rennie and Sean drag him into Jason's homicidal rampage. He really didn't do anything wrong, so Mole Man, take your place in the shrine. Now it is time for final girl Rennie and Sean, who really don't mount much offense to Jason and spend most of their time simply running away, though the little offense they did mount was very effective. In the end, the Deus Ex toxic sludge does Jason in, sending him from his superhuman undead form back to his weak childhood self. I changed my mind with that ending. Please, give me back Roy. Time to recap the rules broken in Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, and who would have guessed rule number 1, keep it in your pants again. The runaway leader with 8 times broken. Then we have use your brain and turn in your colors, both with 5 times broken, and no hanging with Buff, the drug catch-all rule with 4 instances of being broken. Now for the overall series tallies, number 1, keeping your pants nearly at 50 instances. It will definitely get there on our next installment, and would you look at that, If You're an Authority, Don't Be a Dick finally reaches double digits. The numbers are starting to get up there. Huzzah! That's it for this installment. Thanks for stopping by, and have fun storming the castle.